Good morning, everybody. This is Pat Gallagher. I'm here with the Maritime Morning Brief, and we have a guest today, special guest, all the way from the Coast Guard Museum Association, Captain Retired Wes Pulver. Welcome, Wes. Thanks for being here.
Pat, it's great to be here, and it's great to be back out in Seattle.
Yeah, when's the last time you were in Seattle?
It was actually pre-COVID. I'm embarrassed to say it. It's been about 5-6 years since I've been out here.
Wow. And so I was reading up on, I was doing my cyber stalking to kind of prepare for this. So you were 28 years in the Coast Guard, 14 years at sea. Is that right?
About half my time at sea, and I was fortunate about half the time at sea was in command. So I had I had a great ride and loved every bit of it, and really enjoyed it.
What was your best command? I know they're like your children, but what was your favorite?
Well,
Go ahead.
I mean, like I had a patrol boat when I was 24 years old off of Hatteras, and there was 11 of us. I mean, that was extraordinary. Wow. But I loved them all. I mean, I was commanding officer, Coast Guard Bear, doing law enforcement down off of Columbia, and I make the comment. They gave me a helicopter with a sniper rifle and said, "Stop the bad guys," and we shot out cowlings of engines and we stopped drugs from coming in. That was just a blast. And then obviously I was fortunate enough to have Bark Eagle, America's tallest ship. And I had 3 years in command of her, and that was special for so many reasons. So,
yeah,
that was just extraordinary. And but yeah, I love those times underway, and really some of the closest people I've been to my whole life were people I sailed around the world with. It was wonderful.
Did you retire off of Eagle?
I did.
Yeah,
I did. That was a decision. I was offered the opportunity to go back in the front office of the Coast Guard in D.C., and I had just come up before Eagle. I was in Capitol Hill, and so my wife and I had a nice discussion, and it was my my wife's so supportive. It was my decision to, I think we're good, and I hope every Coast Guard retiree that it retires makes it on their makes their own decision, and I got to do that, and so I enjoyed every day in the Coast Guard. I've enjoyed every day in retirement. It's been I'm failing retirement because I have this museum project going on, but it's
no big deal. Just this little side project, this like side hustle you've got going on with the museum.
Just a side hustle, but So I love my time at the Coast Guard, and I've loved my time in retirement. It's been spectacular.
So tell us about the museum. What's going on there? I know it's opening 2027.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've been on this project for a while, and it's about an 85,000 square foot building that when I retired in 2015, that was the job I took in retirement, and for about a decade now, I've worked with some real dedicated folks trying to really tell the Coast Guard story, so all the men and women of the Coast Guard are proud when they come to the museum, hear about the museum. And the other part of it is to tell the story to the American public. I have a board of trustees, and that's their desire. It was not that, hey, let's build a museum. It was we want to help the Coast Guard tell its story. And having served in the Coast Guard, you and I both, Coast Guard doesn't tell its story that much. And so we're going to make an effort to tell that story for the Coast Guard. And, it's a new one in Connecticut, sort of a small area, but we're going to be a national museum, meaning we're going to be a lot more than a regional museum. We're going to have national impact. We're working on that now, but we're starting with completing the museum, the building it done this year. We actually gifted to the Coast Guard. So we have raised just under $60 million in private towards the museum. The federal government, between the museum, the exhibits, all those different elements, is well over $100 million.
Wow.
To get this done. And then our goal is to gift it to the Coast Guard. It becomes a Coast Guard asset. We kind of say it's not a museum, it's a platform for you to tell your story. And then our association will then help the Coast Guard. They'll run it. It's their job to run it, but we're going to help them make sure from a marketing perspective, those things the Coast Guard doesn't really do for itself, we're going to continue to work alongside and make sure that they get the most out of this museum that we've poured our hearts and souls into.
So the history of the Coast Guard Museum, for me, I don't know the whole thing, but it seems to me that what I remember is it was a big priority for Admiral Papp.
It was. So Admiral Papp was one of the leaders on it. Admiral Lloyd was as well.
Okay.
Both have been on our board and been big contributors and getting us the momentum to get there. Admiral Lloyd pitched it way back in 1999, 2000, that time frame.
Really?
And said, love to do it out of the foundation. They took the National Coast Guard Museum Association was a group of individuals at the Coast Guard Foundation that stepped out because they didn't want to overwhelm the foundation against the great work that they do for people of our Coast Guard. So we set up a separate organization, authorized in law in 2003. And then what happened was the association, they just never got going. They thought about 2008, 2009, about the time they'd kick off and start fundraising, and obviously the recession then. So it was a bad timing, and so they went to Admiral Papp, and they sat when he was commandant and said, and it's time. And Admiral Papp, with his leadership, said this is the right thing to do. Let's get it going. And by the time he left in, I believe, 2014, he had the memorandum of understanding signed between the state, the federal government, the National Coast Guard Museum Association, the city, allocating, following the law. The law changed in 2003 to follow the direction of law and build a National Coast Guard Museum. And then the Museum Association didn't start hiring till a few years later in 2015.
So the association is separate organization from the actual museum, and the association is going to be, like you say, the sort of the fundraising arm and the marketing part of it?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We use the term that we want a world-class museum. The Coast Guard, and the reason the Coast Guard never had a museum in the first place is fuel or museum, right? It's always been an organization that's been short on funding and prioritized. So the museum, the building museum, the association took that for the Coast Guard. And so the Coast Guard's excited, and I'll tell you, committed. The leadership is committed to this museum. But we know that the Coast Guard will run the museum. But we use this word world class. What makes the museum world class? Do you have speakers come in, or do you have educators? Coast Guard won't be using their appropriated funding for that. They will to run the museum, tell the story. So there's other things that the museum can do: visiting vessels, rotating galleries, traveling galleries. These are all things we're discussing right now with the Coast Guard is, what part do you guys run and what do you want a nonprofit to support? And the good news is there's a model to do that. The Marine Corps Museum, the Army Museum, Air Force Museum, they're doing the same things. So we're using their model, seeing what works best, and we're turning it into our model.
This is a cool job. How did this happen? What were you sort of in line for this prior to your retirement, or was it like retirement, you're just kind of like hanging out, doing nothing, like, throwing rocks at cars off your porch, and then you're like, maybe I should do something else?
No rocks. No, this is just the vision of Admiral Papp, Admiral Roy, a few folks. I was at Congressional Affairs for a few years, and not to go back too far in history, but when they came up with the museum, there was a food fight over the museum. Where will it go? And it was dealt with in the Senate, and there were some people upset, some people happy. The Connecticut delegation happy. It was set to go to Connecticut. So there were some poison pills about the museum. The other services got financial help, staffing help, a lot of different help to get their museums built. They did them with nonprofits just like we did it. But we had a significant restriction. No federal funding could be used towards the museum. So they brought me in because, and I'm convinced, and I never asked the question, but I had a background on the Hill, knew a lot of people still on the Hill from my time on the Hill, and sat down with folks and who were really interested in the project. And they went through the law, and they said, you know what, we're going to make some changes. They made some changes that allowed the museum to get some federal funding. The initial funding didn't come to us. It went to the Coast Guard to start their exhibitry because they own the storylines. They own what's in the museum. But even putting money to the Coast Guard above their budget to give them some money so that they don't use it for fuel, to give them money to start putting the time and effort into it to get some people going there as well. So I think that's where the vision started from. The prior commandant said that made the call and said, would you get involved? I think it was to allow us to get some federal assistance as the other museums got, and we've done the same. And because of that, we're where we are. I mean, we have all our contracts let. It's going to be just less. It's about an 86,000 square foot building. A helicopter is being installed into the building next week. So there's a lot of great things happening, but we're there because of not just we have about 8,000 donors across the country that have given, their personal funds to it. But in addition, the federal government and their assistance, we've signed all our contracts. It's being built. We're still fundraising for those next roles that the association's going to play to make it world class, but the contracts are signed. But that wasn't done unless the federal government, participated in the development of this museum, and it's been bipartisan, incredible support off the Hill, bipartisan support. Folks are excited about it on the Hill, and we get a lot of visitors that hey, where are we at? And I show them pictures of the steel going up, and we do a once a year congressional breakfast just to show Congress what they've supported to where we are. But I think that's why I got involved. I never asked the question, "Why'd you hire me?" I'm always afraid to ask that. They might say, well,
They're like, "Why did?"
Why did we? And then you've got a bad situation there. So
Oh, no.
so we avoid that question. But I'm pretty sure that's what they were thinking when I decided to retire. They said, maybe it's time to get someone here with that type of background and maybe open up the federal government, participate in development of an asset for the federal government. And that's what's happened. And it's been unbelievable support from the Hill, bipartisan. And it's been quite inspiring, to be honest with you. It's great to see it.
That's awesome. You've dedicated your life to the Coast Guard. Yeah. So how did that happen? Like, when did you start? You went to the academy, correct?
I did go to the academy. Interesting story. My father went to the academy.
Really?
For 2 years and left, and then went to Korea. So I don't know what he did, but it wasn't good. But he left after 2 years, and we were driving across the Gold Star. I was in Rhode Island. We're going to drive in New York City, and he just says, "That's the one regret I have," and he pointed at the academy. And I heard him say that was a freshman in high school. And so I applied without him knowing. I had no idea what I was applying into. I had really no understanding of what a military academy was. There was no internet, didn't really look it up, and applied and got in and decided to give it a shot because my father said I regret not doing that. And that brought me to the academy. A lot of my classmates were ready to go. They're in great shape, and they had been to like ROTC programs. Oh no, not me. I was pretty raw walking in there. But having said that, grew as most cadets do during that period of time in their life. And then, honestly, it was when I got out on my first cutter, my second cutter. That's when I realized how much I really enjoyed what the Coast Guard did. It wasn't. Like a lot of people I see apply because they want to be in the Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. I didn't do the research, and so out there, young individuals, don't listen to me. It's not the right way to do it. But I found myself when I got on my first cutter, the Dauntless, out of Miami, and my first patrol, we had 7 drug busts, and I'm like, this is fun.
This is
something.
good. Yeah.
And then went to a patrol boat in command, and then after that, I went to a command center, and I was joking before, my first watch in the command center, because I'd never been at one before, was really busy. The next day, I'm like, he always is busy. And everyone looked at me cross-eyed. I didn't know it was the first day of the perfect storm. We were moving, aircraft carriers around the Atlantic coast, and I didn't know.
You were in that command center?
I was in the command center during the first day of the perfect storm out of Norfolk, Virginia. Yeah. So it was Portsmouth, Virginia, technically, but it was but I always got to I was just having fun. It was just so much fun, and so did I dedicate my life to it, or did I find something I just really enjoyed? The Coast Guard's been so good to me and my family. So, and then, and you retire, and cool jobs I had along the way, and then retire, and the privilege of giving back to the men and women that are serving and have served. And
I know how you feel when you say it's been so good to me and my family. Yeah. I know exactly how that feels. Personally, when I started, I was pretty aimless. I enlisted. I was 26 years old.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's like, what the hell am I doing? Yeah. And I had no direction really in my life. And then I found the Coast Guard, and I had no intention of staying with it. And sort of like what you're saying, Wes, you show up kind of for the work, and then it's the people. Yeah. It just draws these people, and that's what draws you in. I'm just sort of struck by the fact that now you're working on Coast Guard history, but you're also really a piece of Coast Guard history.
Oh, geez. My wife's going to say I sound old when you say that. No, I don't know.
That perspective, though, I think is pretty.
I had a great run in the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
And so many people, like when I talk to folks and similar commands, similar experiences, the drug bust, it's just, I really enjoyed my time in the service and had really cool jobs and got to meet tons of great people and my family. I married my wife of now 37 years, very independent, was a ballerina, left school early, just a very independent person. I was gone a lot. People asked me about being on the tall ship, and I was on Coast Guard Bark Eagle, and I spent 5 years. And of the 5 years on that ship, the 60 months on that ship, she was in port in New London, Connecticut, where my family was, for 9 months. For 51 months, we were underway or doing maintenance periods, or we were gone a lot. So part of it was not just my experience and having these great, opportunities and great experiences and great adventures, but it was also my wife and the family understanding it and not it never really got between us. It was always sort of like, and I'm out in Seattle. My wife, every time I don't travel, she's like, "When are you traveling?" So, and to give you a feel for our relationship, for my retirement gift, she gave me a membership at a golf course, and I asked her if that she loved me, and she said, "Sure, go with that." So I think she was just what is he going to do? I don't want him around the house. But that's the relationship we have, and if you. We were a few of us were the gentlemen last night, and he just recently lost his wife, and they were married for 66 years.
Wow.
And she just passed, but he was talking about his career and his wife in that career, and I remember as a 23-year-old hearing, and then the spouse. Well, what do they have to do with it? Let me tell you, they have a lot to do with it. And I was just very lucky with my relationship, my wife and my family, to allow me to have that adventure. But and when I retired, it was off to a new adventure with the family, and that's been fun too.
Yeah, amazing. So I always think about Coast Guard history in terms of the context of the nation. Like,
Sure.
I'm always, the more I learn about it, the more shocking it is to me. Some of the roles that the Coast Guard has played that virtually nobody, I mean, you of course know this, but it makes me wonder about some of the things that have happened recently. And of course we can talk about, hundreds of years of history, but like, it makes me think about things like 9/11,
Sure.
because within my own career, that was pretty pivotal. We were transportation, then there was 9/11, and then soon after we were DHS, and things changed so much. And I felt lucky to be, pre. I came in, I think, in 1998, and just to sort of see that transition, and it's been so vast. So my question is, where were you on 9/11, and what happened?
I was in a budget meeting.
Wow.
On the Coast Guard Vark Eagle. I was second in command, and the supply officer walked in and said, we were having our budget meeting, and she stepped out because she was also officer of the day, and she's going to say, hey, an airplane just hit the towers. And so I'm like, yeah, supply meeting. So we're trying to figure out the budget for the next year, and because it's right before the end of the fiscal year. And then she came back in. A second one did, and then the phone rang. And on the ship, none of us had security clearances. And but I had just come out of Coast Guard headquarters, and I had one. So I went up and got briefed. I went over to the academy. We were actually downtown, and actually where the museum is. We were downtown New Orleans at the time, and came back and basically said we need to go hide. And this commanding officer is a great friend, and we got underway. And because America's tall ship, they didn't know. I mean, no one knew at that time what the targets were, and we had America's tall ship on everything, and so a lot of the UNIS, Coast Guard, Navy, a lot of the places that sort of represent the United States of America, both in the States and abroad, were of concern for targeting. So we got underway.
So the Eagle sailed right after 9/11.
We got underway within about 2 hours, and we went offshore for about 3 days. And then we went back to the naval base, the Groton sub base. We went there because all the subs got underway. Similar situation. They all got underway. So we went to the naval base, and Eagle has never had so much security with the Marine detachments that didn't have submarines to secure. So they were up in the yard arms. There was Marines everywhere, and no one was getting on near America's tall ship.
Wow.
So we went there, and then it was interesting part was the Coast Guard, the response, and you were part of that too. Is no one really knew what So we better secure every port. So all of major fleet, the major cutters in the Coast Guard, I'm sure there was one out of Seattle, one off of like the Columbia River. We put ships everywhere. The Coast Guard put ships everywhere.
Yeah.
And where they didn't put them was at the Coast Guard yard. So in the middle of 9/11, it just happened. Everyone don't know what to do. They had all these contracts at the Coast Guard yard. The Coast Guard has their own yards to do maintenance on major vessels. And so they called us and said, we have a lot of people looking for work, and there's no ships coming in. Can they work on Eagle? So we went to the Coast Guard yard for that year and the next, not planned. We overhauled the mast, the mizzen. We replaced a lot of steel in the hull. We ended up, because of 9/11, Eagle, I think its service life was clearly extended because a lot of money was invested into it because the Coast Guard had paid for all that labor already. The people were already there ready to work, no ships. So Eagle went down because I don't think anyone would have got intimidated if they saw the Eagle at the at the Verrazano Bridge. And
Right.
that was what we were trying to do. So we ended up, Eagle itself, and was interesting. It was almost to Eagle, because the cutters were out there securing the ports and making sure my parents and your parents, American public, saw that the Coast Guard's out there keeping our ports safe after such a tragic event. We ended up So we went from getting underway to going up to the sub base and being called and said, you need to be down the Coast Guard yard. And we went down there for 5 or 6 months. And then the next year, get underway. And one of our first port calls was New York City for Fleet Week. And no one could buy themselves a drink. Let me tell you that. That was a heck of a 4 days. That was amazing. New York City was just so supportive of the military, and it was just an amazing, amazing time in New York City.
So then what year was that? If it was
2001, so it was spring of 2002.
So it was 2002 when you did Fleet Week.
In New York City, and it was just extraordinary and absolutely extraordinary.
Wow.
And just the love for what our military was doing around the world at that point, and obviously, New York City. I mean, New York was hit so hard. But
so I made it to New York City in 2003.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cliches about New York City. Some are obviously true. There's a reason. But what I found is that is an incredibly patriotic place.
Yeah, especially at that time.
Yeah, especially at that time.
It was just unbelievable. And so I remember going in. So, but all that happened so fast, right? It was just
a blur.
But people, where were you with 9/11? It was in a budget meeting.
Wow.
Trying to figure out how we're going to spend our money the next year, and then. But 9/11, like its impact, it was extraordinary for the Coast Guard. I mean, I came out of Coast Guard headquarters, and we were fighting for nickels and dimes.
Yep.
Our service had shrunk quite considerably in the 90s, and trying to figure out and making sure every dollar went to the exact right spot. And if you look at the size of the Coast Guard, then similar people-wise, but from an investment, maybe $2 or $3 billion organization, it's 4 times bigger now with investment. Some of the investment recently, the reconciliation bill with things like the icebreakers and missions that the Coast Guard was slowly. I mean, you're in Seattle, you see the Polar Star we're down to one, one major with Healy here too as a medium, but with the icebreaking and you look at the investment being made now, but that moment sort of changed at 9/11 when the country looked at the Coast Guard differently, and then Homeland Security comes along and here's the Coast Guard doing all these incredible missions that people don't know.
Yeah.
That was neat, actually. You mentioned the museum is when we started the museum project in 2015-16. One of the first things we did is we brought a lot of the nonprofits, the pterodactyls, the aviators. We brought in the Ancient Trident, the marine safety folks. We brought in the Cuttermen. We brought in different groups, the CPO, all these different Coast Guard affinity groups, and just passion for the Coast Guard, all these nonprofits. And we brought them. We went to New Orleans, and we sat around and said, how do we tell the Coast Guard story? You got 11 statutory missions, but one of them was MLE other, Maritime Law Enforcement other. How do you tell? That's exciting. Mm-hmm. So we sat around and, do we tell it? Do we tell a linear like you start in, 1790 and you walk to today and you go to the museum? How do you do this? And we sat around and we were telling the story and we kind of came up with a way. We suggested the Coast Guard, they embraced it of telling the story through 5 missions, lifesavers around the globe, You've got enforcers on the seas, defenders of our nation. But the two that people don't know about, now your folks might know more about it, but the two folks really don't know about is champions of commerce and the Coast Guard's role within commerce. That's 20% of the museum that we're going to put aside to that. And then the other one is protection of the environment. Folks don't understand the role that the Coast Guard plays there between oil spills all the way to living marine fisheries and all the LMR and living marine resources. So it's how do you tell the Coast Guard story? Is sort of kind of a underlying. How do you tell that story? How do you get in front of folks and get kids excited and people excited? So we came up with these 5 different mission areas to tell that Coast Guard story in a way that I think people are going to be surprised. People are going to go lifesavers around the world globe and they go, oh, this is what I know about the Coast Guard. And they're going to go to Defender's Wing and go, I didn't realize the Coast Guard was in every single one of these wars. That's interesting and a little bit of why and. The Coast Guard was there in the War of 1812 because our Navy was just effectively disestablished, reestablished, and they weren't ready for it. And we had smaller cutters, and we could do some things. And all of a sudden now we're in the wartime, and then enforcers and obviously the drug war people, but people go back. I mean, the Coast Guard started to enforce tariffs, and people don't realize we started with maritime law enforcement and stay out of Department of War because we don't want to take away that authority from our service. And because you always get that question, why are you in DOD or DOW?
Right.
Because if you do, you don't get to enforce laws, and that's one of that extra mission that the Coast Guard brings to our National Security Council and our president to execute law. But then you get into this champions of commerce, and interesting, like American Waterways operators, met with them early, been a great donor. Our relationship with them was phenomenal in support of the museum. I remember talking, they're like, how do you How do you tell the commerce story? It's the navigation piece, but it's also regulatory. It's working with industry. It's all those things that hopefully, and again, the Coast Guard's working on that right now with some great firms to tell those stories. And I get to see it in a year, because in a year it's going to be up and running. So that's going to be really cool. But how do you tell the story, and how do you bring commerce into it? Because the role of the Coast Guard, and but most of the country doesn't understand, is that a lot of the public won't understand, is that relationship, that partnership with commerce to make sure we can do what we do in all these different ports around the country, and which is extraordinary. And of course, the environment piece that, other than Exxon Valdez, people probably don't realize what Coast Guard does, and that that was what 1989, so that was a year or two ago, right? So don't understand the role the Coast Guard plays in the environment too. So it's going to be neat telling that story and watching people walk through the museum and realizing that I had no idea the Coast Guard did that too, and so it's exciting.
What's a story that you may have come across, a Coast Guard story that really surprised you?
Oh, I've never been asked that question. Let me think about that. In the museum development, or me in general?
You.
Actually, the one that, and I was involved with this, so it's personal to me, is the Coast Guard, like my father-in-law. What coast are you guarding? I visited 42 countries when I was on the Coast Guard cutter Dallas. And you sit there and say, like, why would the Coast Guard be in the Baltic? Why would it be in the Black Sea? And and so we go over, and you find out about the Coast Guard cutter Courier, and you're doing Voice of America and doing stuff like that. I didn't know that we did that. And so here I'm getting involved with this mission that we're going to go over to the Black Sea.
I didn't know we did that either.
and we're going to visit all of these countries that were former Soviet Union countries. And we're going to visit them as a sort of a mission for State Department, as much as, in general, is to basically say, a lot of you smaller countries, maybe you don't need a nuclear navy, maybe you just need a Coast Guard. And here goes the Coast Guard cutter Dallas in 1994, Gallatin went in 1995. There's been a lot of cutters. We have our national security cutters are always out in the Southeast Asia. The fact that the Coast Guard does that and really, sort of models the way for all these other nations on how to have not just a war machine, but a humanitarian service that does search and rescue and protects fisheries and all those things. So I never thought the Coast Guard did that. I was surprised, and then the reality was I ended up spending 120 days of my life over in Eastern Europe, and
wow,
I never thought that. So yeah, that's probably the biggest surprise to me, and ironically, I was part of it. Is what the Coast Guard's doing, not just, and it's those 5 direct mission areas that those 5 areas that we talk about in the museum, but that the Coast Guard goes around the world to kind of model the way. And the ultimate compliment to the service is when you look at all these Coast Guard vessels in all these different countries, including China, they love the Coast Guard stripe on the front of them. They have their own stripes to kind of do what we did. And so I think it's just such an important tool for our National Security Council, our president, for our government, to have this agency this military armed service that can also humanitarian and just go from, when you look at the whole, the swath of all the options, you've got this service in there that can do all these interesting pieces. I would never have known that, and I got to, be part of it, and that was pretty extraordinary.
I'm probably maybe not expecting this question, but have you been to the museum in Astoria?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, you have? Yeah.
No, Bruce Jones well out there doing great work out there.
Oh, cool.
And they're expanding right now. And they're
they are?
They are. They're gonna. And hey, Bruce, there you are. I'm pitching for you, Bruce. in the
I love that
the Columbia
place.
River Museum.
It's really cool. Yeah.
So what they've done is they've looked at another place so they can start looking at I believe they're getting a Dolphin helicopter, if I remember correctly. And they'll put assets, because in the Columbia River Museum itself, it's it's a space, obviously the 44-footer, the motor lifeboat's there. But when you look at that museum, not a lot of space to put in a helicopter there. So Bruce Jones, with his leadership, and he was formerly the mayor of Astoria as well, so good Coast Guard retiree doing great stuff. He had a vision of sort of bringing assets in. So he's been working on that. I think they just secured a 65, one of the H-65 helicopters for it. And been there. And it was also really cool. And I don't know if you know this is pretty cool, Patrick, but if you go to the pilot station right there, so I went over to the pilot station, I was visiting and was talking to them, and I walk in and they have all the pilots from the mid-1940s, and they're all in their Coast Guard uniforms.
Oh,
because they were brought into all the pilots around the country brought into the reserve of the Coast Guard during World War II. And they all had
really?
so all the pilots.
How did I not know this?
It's so cool.
That's
It's so
crazy.
cool. So I'm in the pilot station. I see all these Coast Guard uniforms, and at the time I didn't know. So I didn't know, so I'm looking at it. So I'm like, why were they all in the Coast Guard? Well, yeah, the Coast Guard, all the pilots around the country were working at the Coast Guard during World War II because of other concerns they had for shipping, and it was sort of a nationalized effort to keep our ports safe. And they went that far, and I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing. So that's so. if you go to
Wow.
the next time you go to the museum, make sure you stop by the pilot station.
I
You
will.
can see a lot of pilots that are wearing Coast Guard uniform and looking really good. It's
Cool.
fantastic.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, final question. What's something that you wish everybody knew about the Coast Guard?
I think its impact on our country. When people ask about the Coast Guard Museum, and I always tell people we're going to tell a maritime story through the lens of the Coast Guard, right? We obviously have a maritime country. A lot of people don't know that, and well, here you are at the Maritime Exchange, and a lot of people don't understand the impact of commerce on our country and how important it is to our country. People don't see that, and people don't see things like the Coast Guard and its impact over the history of our service between, from World War II to saving lives to helping with, obviously, with commerce and the different things the Coast Guard does. I think that's important to me, that as people go through and when they learn about the Coast Guard, the breadth of what the Coast Guard does, and part of that is actually letting people realize that it's a maritime nation. People sometimes we just don't see that. We're very, very internal focused, but everything that's coming in out of Seattle is the lifeblood of our country. Everything in the inland rivers is the lifeblood of our country. I go back to AWO. What AWO is doing and moving commerce around through our rivers and around the country. The fuel, obviously, the gas prices have got people's attention with the way oil comes to our country and all the rest. But all of that is so interrelated. So I think coming to the museum and seeing the story of the Coast Guard, and then if people kind of pull themselves back and say, wow, they've done this, this, and this, you can either focus on that or realize the bigger role that the Coast Guard's played with our maritime history and therefore the history of our nation, realizing the relationship between the maritime and our country itself, take the Coast Guard out of it, the importance of that. I think that would be a great outcome. And then on a personal note, in addition to the stories, some simulators and stuff, so maybe the kids get to go do something pretty cool, and maybe it inspires something. Maybe
Absolutely.
It's on the maritime, maybe it's in the service, maybe it's in government, maybe it's just being a great American patriot.
After all, a conversation when you were young sparked an entire career for you.
Yeah, and it was a funny. That's right. Go back to my dad's comment. That's my one regret, and then I got to ask questions about it. But yeah, no, the idea of adults and people that the adults that come in and learn the story of the Coast Guard, the maritime nation, all those things. I think that'd be a really great outcome. Understand the importance of the maritime for the way we all live our wonderful lives that we have in this great country, and then with the kids, it's for them to maybe. We have a qual program that we're putting together so the kids can go through and get qualified and they get a little pin on the way out. How
That's
great
awesome.
would that be? Which kid's going to get inspired by that and do something and have that one thing that maybe sets them up for something great in life? So those are fun opportunities with the museum. And right now we're focused in the New London, Connecticut region, but we really want to have impact around the country. We're trying to figure that out too. And, Pacific Northwest Museum here is right here in Seattle. How do we help them, to tell the story out here too? So we're going to get there. We're going to go from more of a one location to a national presence for our museum, and can't wait to be part of that journey.
Awesome. Well, Wes, thank you so much for being here.
That's great.
The work you're doing, I just kept thinking while you were talking, you're obviously so passionate about this. I think you're really just doing something amazing for our nation, and I'm sort of jealous because you're gonna be there when it actually opens, and all of this effort and all of this vision that's been coming together for now decades, you're gonna be standing right there, and I think that's amazing. So thank you so much for being here. Please come back.
Sure.
Don't wait another.
Yeah, it was like 6 years between my trips out here. So
you're welcome here
good to be
anytime,
back.
and I really thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for doing this and work at the Maritime Exchange, and congrats on a great career yourself.
Absolutely.
Good stuff, Pat.
All right. Well, that's us signing off for today for this episode of the Maritime Morning Brief. We'll see you again tomorrow morning, bright and early.